Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Ben Wightwick, how you doing this morning, sir?
Very good, sir. Very good. You?
I'm doing great. And I just realized that on the Isle of Wight, it isn't morning, it's afternoon, isn't it?
It is afternoon, but I was allowing you that. I was allowing you that, so it's fine. I can pretend it's morning just for you, Ted. It's good.
So the Isle of Wight, and you're Ben. Are you royalty on the island?
No, unfortunately not. I think I am. I walk around it like I am, but I'm not. I'm not.
Do you wear a crown at all?
I have people that carry me around on a chair.
Oh, that's good stuff. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you joining me this afternoon or this morning, my time. And before we jump into the conversation, you and I have known each other a long time. In fact, we met at an ILTA Awards dinner. I think it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
And I was shortlisted for an award and I didn't win. And then because you were sitting at my table, but I went without you and I won. Is that coincidence, or do you think there's a connection there?
There is definitely no coincidence there. The fact that you've just recently won an award has nothing to do with your association with me, in proximity or otherwise.
Yeah, I think I was going to win it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Only took 10 years. Well, before we jump into the conversation, why don't you give a little background? I think, on like your work history, what you're doing now. I think when you and I met, you were at HiQ, and you're doing some interesting stuff now with workflows and at Autologyx. So give us a little history on your background.
Cool. So I'm old. That's the thing, and I've been in the industry for a long time. So potted history looks like 2.5 years here at Autologyx, 10 years, just shy of 10 years actually at HiQ after the acquisition by TR, and probably about 11 years inside of a law firm, CMS. So I started at CMS on a service desk. Basically, I was just fixing things on the phones and running up to partners' offices and fixing printers and changing mice and configuring Blackberries and stuff like that. When I left CMS, I was sort of heading up their business analysis team. So it's like hybrid project management, business analysis, looking at how we delivered projects, what were the projects. We were currently doing a big sort of desktop replacement project. And I got to know lots of vendors. And I thought to myself, hey, maybe I could try my hand on the other side of the fence. I've bought technology for a law firm. Maybe there's an opportunity to work for somebody on the other side that sort of sells it, not selling it directly, because I've never really considered myself a sales guy, but more so a product guy. And so I badgered and pestered Stu and AJ at HiQ. I volunteered myself to be their first and only janitor, and they ignored me for about 9 months. And then I managed to get myself a job as an implementation consultant, and then sort of spent 9 years doing everything from implementations to professional services to onboarding, customer success. I did 4 or 5 years inside of the product team. So it was really interesting. But I think all of that sort of history and experience of buying software and configuring it and implementing it for sort of the practice inside of a law firm, and then thinking about how you take the constructs of those things and then influence the development or the building or the services that surround a product, and influencing it from directly inside has given me a lot of sort of breadth really in terms of experience. I get bored really quickly and easily, so I like to have variety in what I do. So I've got a whole bunch of responsibilities now here at Autologyx. I mean, we're a relatively small organization, but that means that we have the opportunity to get involved in lots of different things. And luckily, I've got some degree of experience in lots of different things. So it's great.
So, Autologyx, are you guys strictly legal? Do you do business outside of law firms? Is it just law firms, and do you do inside counsel as well?
Yeah, so we're sort of a 10-year-old business, founded by another Ben Stoneham, and so he started off the business inside of the industries that he knew. So he operated inside of the staffing and recruitment world, so organizations like Adecco and the like, where they're sort of having to orchestrate the placement of candidates and making sure that they've got right to work visas and various other bits and pieces, going through checks and processes. And then about 5 years ago, we started picking up law firm clients. And so we sort of moved, not wholeheartedly, we still have those legacy clients. The one thing about Autologyx is because we are sort of deeply embedded into clients' workflows and processes, it makes us really sticky. So we still have a lot of the legacy older clients from the staffing recruitment world, in terms of our sort of client makeup. But we've been onboarding professional services firms, law firms, and increasingly talking to in-house counsel, and large corporates now. So thinking about sort of anything that has a feeling of data. So the foundations of our platform are data. So we don't think of documents as documents. We think of documents as data. So a lot of legal processes start with a document. We try and tear that back and think about the data that's sort of underlying it. But then thinking about sort of the business processes, the compliance processes, the governance processes that surrounds those activities, whether it be within a practice, whether it be operationally within an organization, and create those environments and software sort of structures that allows people to manage stuff within our system. But our system is orchestrating those workflows and processes behind the scenes. So thinking about contract remediation or repapering, getting a corpus of, 10,000 documents in, reviewing them, managing the triage and task allocation, understanding who's done what and by when, making sure the reporting to the end client is done, but making sure that everything is structured and organized so that you can sort of deliver the productivity and efficiency that workflow and process platforms promise, if that makes sense.
We were going to have this part of the conversation a little further on, but since we're talking about it, let's go ahead and jump into the workflow and automation world. We are M365, centric, right? Infodash is built on SharePoint Online. We stand up an API as part of our deployment process that allows firms to build, workflows using Power Automate or build apps using Power Apps. How does Autologyx differentiate itself from kind of the generic, Power Automates of the world?
Yeah, I think how we separate ourselves out is that we've got clients that are using both, quite frankly. The nature of being sort of Microsoft centric for you guys and the extensions that surround that, obviously you've got massive benefits. You've got sort of the ecosystem that surrounds it, it's Power Apps and everything else. I don't like using the term too often, but thinking about low code development. So thinking about, can a business user configure this? What are the technical requirements? Now, ultimately, low code is a bit of a misnomer because we're dealing with technology. Not everything is configuration. You do need to understand APIs and configuration tools and then integration. So there is a degree of technical understanding that you need. But I think the whole thing with Power Apps is grown massively, and I think what we've seen in the legal industry is that Power Apps is people are in because they are so Microsoft centric. They are inquiring and inquisitive around what it can offer them. You see a lot of other vendors, some of the bigger vendors that have limited workflow capabilities promoting Power Apps and the Power Platform itself and starting to look at that. I think some of the challenges around those things are obviously, though, that you tend to find that you become locked in one environment. Now, that might be a good thing, but that also is a limitation in our view. And in terms of how you sort of start to think about the nature of the kinds of processes and workflows that we're seeing our clients come to us for, they can't do them in Power Apps, or they can, but with a great deal amount of customization and in extensions. So because not all, but if you think of a workflow as a sub part of a process, and a process being sort of the end-to-end layer, our platform orchestrates end-to-end processes and facilitates the workflow that are within them. Now, some of that workflow is talking to other platforms and doing other things that, quite frankly, don't exist in Autologyx, but we're facilitating the step-through process to make sure that that process is being audited and governed and compliant and all that sort of thing. So you start to think about sort of what can you do? How do you extend it? What does that look like? And that's where it's really interesting because you then start thinking about costs and all that sort of stuff. So it's like Power Platform's got its pricing options and its structure. But ultimately, as soon as you need to do something complex and really challenge it, you're sort of taking your time, and it's therefore time is money, and you're having to engage in consultants. I think that's the other thing, is that you sort of people are having to bring in consultants, external consultants, or upskill their own people in the complexities and building out a Power Platform. And there's a challenge with that. And I think the other thing is that you start to think about naturally when you're building something yourself, you're then managing that, and you've added to your infrastructure or software real estate. You're not relying on a third party to sort of ultimately provide that service. And I think sometimes there's a particularly, and I'm casting my mind back, but ultimately when we've got it, where I've had experiences, you're building stuff in Power Apps or you're building stuff in other technologies, and actually you then move on to the next project because IT need to go on to the next project and on to the next project, and that maintenance and that evolution. Because I think one of the big things around our platform is that sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, but ultimately you think about how you need to iterate. You might design a process now, but actually it might be different in 3 months for legal reasons, or it might be different because of a resource change or a merger or whatever it might be. And so starting to think about a platform that allows you to iterate against it and develop and evolve is really important. And that's one of the things that we're really good at in terms of how we provide the platform, the enablement, education. And this really wasn't supposed to be about a pitch for Autologyx, but you asked, so but the services that we wrap around it, I think that's a big part of it, if that makes sense. It's like that classic software as a service, B2B stuff. We've all bought them and we've all sort of lived with it, but I think we've all experienced the power of a really good services engine. You guys coming back from your origins from Infodash and prior, the service that you wrap around your software is oftentimes the most valuable thing. Software is really a commodity unless you're doing something like groundbreakingly wonderful. But I think it's how you deliver the service, it's what you're doing, it's how you're doing it, how you're building those relationships. Those are the things that sort of factor into how we think about the technology and the part that technology plays.
Yeah. Speaking of, so a couple things coming to mind there. Amy Monahan and I just did a episode I think it's going to be released here very soon.
Cool.
And she's had a customer success, and we're doing something that I think is somewhat novel in legal tech. I mean, if it exists elsewhere, I haven't seen it, but we are creating success plans collaboratively with the client, sometimes all the way into the sales cycle before they actually become clients, and documenting what their objectives are, and then meeting with them quarterly to update the plan because objectives can change, and evaluating how we are progressing against that plan. And I mean, you were customer success for years. Were you guys doing something similar? I know QBRs that's like table
Yeah.
stakes in customer success, but I don't know. I've seen fairly lacking at customer success processes and focus, and I don't know if that's because in legal, a handful of vendors control probably 80% of the ecosystem, right? The Lateras, the Adderants, the Lexus, like the big guys have bought up so many. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Is that new, or is that?
Ooh, so this is so I love talking about customer success. So I often think of even my time in product at HiQ, I was customer success, really thinking about it in terms of how we thought about it. Um, at one point, I headed up a team of 10 people globally and ran customer success for HiQ prior to the TR acquisition. And for some of our larger accounts, we did have success plans, and success plans included things like sort of lead activities. So how are you onboarding? What for a new customer? How are you onboarding them? What are their success criteria? What are they doing? How are they thinking about it? That whole customer education and enablement. So with a platform like HiQ and InfoDash to some degree, I'm sure, where somebody can solve multiple problems with the same technology, you need to make sure that people are aware of what's capable. Now, they might have, talking to your sort of customer success plan, you might have, from an intranet perspective, for you guys, you might have, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. But actually, we all know, not we all know, but there is an understanding that an intranet means different things to different people in different practice areas. So how do you scale that? What does that look like? What do you tackle first? What's the pathways to doing that? And as you're onboarding a new customer or working with an existing customer, all of those things are important, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that the customer is extracting more value from your platform. They're becoming stickier, they're doing the right things, which often ultimately leads into sort of lag indicators of positivity. So it might result in an uptick in revenue. It might result in advocacy. So one of the best things that we built at HiQ back in the day was the understanding of this ecosystem whereby our customers would talk to each other, and we would welcome that and foster that. And so that whole advocacy side of things was a self sort of fulfilling thing. If we were bad, then they would know we were bad. But ultimately, what we wanted to do is make sure that we were talking to the right people, creating those communities and those champions, and encouraging and sort of encouraging those things to take place. So I'll really look forward to listening to yourself and Amy's podcast coming up, because that whole approach to customer success and how you do that and how you embed that to influence the customer journey and the customer experience is exactly what everyone should be doing. I think, as you say, you've got the big boys, I manage, and others, that if they rely on the account management half of the customer relationship, which is your QBRs and your invoicing and your processes and everything else. And then the value side is the customer success side, which is how are you producing, how are you adding value? What are you doing? What does that mean? How can you sort of build out those relationships? somebody on who was a previous podcast person. I can't think of the word. Anyway, my brain's
Guest.
Meredith before. So I
Yeah.
remember having a conversation with Meredith at ILTA back 8 years ago, maybe. And she said, people buy from people. People want to work from people. Now, that sounds obvious, but actually, people aren't going to buy from you if you're not sort of not selling the dream, but you've got to put in the work and the effort. The software can't just do the software thing. You've got to put the human aspect of things around it. And I think that it's a really powerful strategy, one that we've employed here at Autologyx over the 2 years I've been at Autologyx, in terms of how we break down and construct our customer engagement. What does that mean? What does that do? Some of our clients do have success plans because they are naturally inquisitive and growing. Some of our customers, they don't want one because they're happy doing the one thing that they do or the two things that they do. So it isn't a one size fits all, but the ethos and the intention behind it is about adding value. And how can you add value? What does that look like? Now, I'll be interested in your view in this, because obviously, in order to do that, you have to invest. You invest in time. You're doing something that isn't ultimately resulting in revenue right now. What does that mean for a company like Infodash? How have you approached it? Or am I going to? Do I need to wait for the podcast episode?
No, it's a fair question, and we didn't get into that much detail. It's towards the end of the episode,
Okay.
and we recorded on a Saturday just because our schedules were so busy. So I tried to not keep her too long, but so our view on this is, when companies are in the early stages, and we are, so we were originally called AcroWire. We started in 2008. We did time and materials development of law firm intranets almost from day one. We fell into the legal rabbit hole really early, but we productized. We started working on the product in 2018. We had a couple wrong turns. In fact, we had to completely abandon a code base. We started out, Microsoft's development model changed in SharePoint Online. It used to be Angular and the SharePoint specific APIs, and then Microsoft came out with a completely new model that was SPFX and React, and so we took a couple wrong turns, but it's still a relatively new technology, and there's benefits to that because our stuff is very modern and lean, and it leverages the latest patterns and practices and technologies. But on the flip side, we are still learning how clients want to use it and all of the use cases. Like, I advocate against firms spending big sums of money on envisioning engagements. It's like, look, we've been doing this 16 years. Like, maybe in 2012, it made sense to spend money and time interviewing stakeholders and, putting together wireframes and all of that sort of stuff. Today, we've solved every problem in law firms that there is. The odds of, and I said this on the last episode, the odds of a law firm coming to us with a new use case that we haven't heard of, it's not zero, but it's close, right? We're probably not. So it's very unusual. So I advocate against firms hiring consultants to come in and do these expensive engagements. Okay, but because the product is still evolving, us investing in customer success, it's not just making our customers happy. Those are our tentacles into here, getting feedback and understanding how the product, new innovations, new features, new capabilities, new roadblocks, and honestly, new product opportunities. Like, we are blown away, honestly, by how much value firms are getting from just our API. That's just infrastructure. like they're doing things like I was telling you about. You and I probably a long overdue conversation talking about how we may work together,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
we go out and hit and integrate with all these back end systems and then expose it through a unified RESTful API. And firms love that way more than we thought they would. So, through these customer success conversations, we uncover that and then we invest in those areas.
No,
Does
and
that make
that,
sense?
yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think that's the thing, and it's sort of one of the things that we recognized early on in our customer success journey at IQ is that actually the customer isn't just the named person that gets the invoice. You should be talking to 4 or 5 different personas. So somebody in knowledge, somebody in IT, somebody in the practice. What are they doing? How are they doing it? The evolution of the innovation team inside of law firms over the last 5 years that sort of now is rolling back into knowledge, but somewhere in between. It's really interesting to look at that dynamic and understand sort of where that sort of sits. But only when you're talking to different stakeholders, different personas, and you're bringing those and understanding those insights together, that's sort of how you get the value of that. And we sort of, one of the things that we're trying to do at Autologyx is start to build up that map of stakeholders and then sort of join the dots around almost like a graph and go, so who are all our IT infrastructure people? Who are all of our KM people? What are they saying? So it isn't just taking insights from customers in the big, it's sort of creating those verticals of information and putting that information in context to then drive product ideation opportunities or knowledge opportunities or sort of training opportunities or whatever it might be, and starting to look at those things. And I think I'm a firm believer that whilst our flavor, and it sounds like it's our flavor of customer success, is expensive from a time and a sort of a human interaction perspective, you start to really reap the rewards of that. And for a small organization, and we're both fairly similar sized organizations, it's time consuming and it's costly, and it's at the expense of doing something else, but it's done to create the foundation of your customers and your customer experience and why you're doing it and how you're doing it, which ultimately is, I spent a bit of time with our team, my team, not our team, because it's not our team, it's my team, but you know what I mean. A couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about making some changes to some processes and how we interact with our customers around statements of work and engagements and everything else. And I'm sort of sat there going, hang on a minute, we're thinking about us at the moment. We're not, what's the impact on the customer? Is it making their lives easier? Can we do something better? What does it look like? How are they going to sort of consume this information? And I think as soon as we started to do that, we ended up in a completely different place. We ended up with a completely reimagined way of doing that particular process. And I think that's the right way to do it. Invest in your customers in the same way that they're investing in you.
Yeah, 1,000%. You said it's expensive to do it. It's also expensive not to do it,
Oh,
right?
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's just the expense that you incur is a little bit further down the timeline, right? But and that's when you're in startup mode. You have to make, and I mean, I don't think either one of us technically are, but we still behave like we are because neither one of us have $20 million Series A rounds that we have to do things that make sense, and that's a constant evaluation. Is where do I invest now? That the ROI has a reasonable horizon. And to your point about stakeholders, very transparently, I was at a conference. I've been to so many recently, but I think this was like 3 conferences ago, and sat with a couple of customers. They were sitting right in front of me, and I hadn't met them before, and they've been customers for, I don't know, a year and a half. And I thought everything was going swimmingly with them. And they shared with me some frustrations that they had.
Yeah.
And I went back to the team and said, "How did you know that these guys were frustrated with the process?" And um, we had no idea. And the reason is because we were talking to the wrong people. Like the
Yeah.
people on the front
Exactly.
line they understood all of the challenges. We were doing an integration with a third party system that was unreliable, undocumented. You know the drill in with legal systems. That's kind of seems to be the standard. And we were getting back unpredictable results. But yeah, we had no idea that at the higher level, at the executive level, they were frustrated with the progress. So, and this was when we had not gotten there yet with Amy and building out a success plan. But part of our process is, okay, not only do we need the people who are signing the checks to nod and say, this
Yeah.
is how we feel about the way things are going and where the direction that we want to go, but people on the front lines. And it's almost like a project charter. When you first start out, you have a list of stakeholders, and it having that asset that everybody can look at and agree upon and circulate within the team on both sides of the table, that is a very valuable thing. So yeah, it was a lesson learned, and we immediately corrected, and we understood once we understood where the gaps were. But I want to transition the conversation into extranet, because you spent a lot of time there, and that's a product that we're working on. So in our AcroWire days, we built plenty of bespoke extranet solutions for law firms.
Yeah.
We've decided to productize that as part of InfoDash, and we have a committee of, I don't know, 8 or 10 AM law firms. Most of them are C-level execs that are providing us. We just had our first meeting, I don't know, 4 weeks ago, and they're providing us feedback on the requirements for kind of a Gen 1 release. And our strategy is to unify collaboration. So internally, like historically, how things have worked is law firms have had some internal facing, intranet solution that provided integrations and management interface and personalization and all those sorts of things. And then they had a completely separate system like HiQ, where they interfaced with customers. So 2 systems to license. Training, you got to understand how to manage both. And our strategy is to kind of bring those things together. Why have 2? Why not have 1? We're now in a place where I think that's viable. But in your years with HiQ and your knowledge of extranets, what do you think about the concept of unifying collaboration?
I think it's fundamental. I mean, I don't think it was me. I think it was my esteemed ex-colleague Stuart Barr. But we started talking about unified collaboration at HiQ when we were trying to push, just prior to the TR sort of acquisition, into intranets. And so we were coming at it from a slightly different direction. We were managing transactions and managing sort of client-facing portals and all of the tools and services that would go around that. And we were being asked by customers that they were unhappy with their existing sort of SharePoint or otherwise bespoke platform for their intranet, and can we do something about that? And it was like, well, yeah, but there's some things that we don't do, and there's some things that we do from a technology standpoint. And that's how. So we talked a lot about that, and there are natural tensions, particularly in an industry that is so highly regulated and sort of structured as legal, that you start to think about, okay, what are the ethical walls between things? What are the somebody's doing something in one system, yet it's good that it's going to be client facing and it's branded a different thing because they might share the wrong information, or they might do the wrong thing, or they might do whatever. but ultimately you can do the same damage inside of Outlook. You know what I mean? It's sort of, it's just, it's the technology and it's the experience, but it's breaking down for unified collaboration to work. It's breaking down those preconceived sort of notions that different types of work should be done in different types of solutions, and there's a division between them because of it's almost protecting against human error, and it becomes a sort of a change management, human management kind of thing. So yeah, we've faced a lot of that back in the day. I think as one of the reasons why we did well back in the day at HiQ in terms of the rise of the extranet and what we were doing and how we were doing it, because we did have customers that had sort of SharePoint environments, and we did have customers that had others, and that it didn't own the market in that sense. But ultimately, it started off as an extranet, and an extranet to URI. We could probably write down the definition, and it will probably be 70% the same. But ultimately, there is that 30%, and the 30% is the most important bit. So it's engaging with your customers or third parties in a secure environment that facilitates work to be done. And I think that is what that unification of that collaboration kind of experience is. How do you draw that together? What does that look like? I think the interesting thing is that Microsoft have made it really interesting because they've pulled their fingers out of their bottoms and created an environment. I almost swore, Ted. At the very beginning, we said that we wouldn't swear, but I almost did. But they over the last 5 years, they've really brought it together, and they've facilitated and really, really sort of allowed organizations like yours to build really robust, really strong platforms and evolve that and iterate against that and develop against that. And I think that was always going to be the case, but sort of SharePoint was always a challenge back in the day. It was always a problem. You always need administrators and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's where HiQ came in and sort of broke that mold, because there was that opportunity. And I think that opportunity is sort of dwindling. But I think I often, I don't like saying the word innovation, and I don't like saying other things like AI and all that sort of stuff. I got out of the habit of saying extranet, because an extranet, as I said, means different things to different people. And it's about getting stuff done. And I almost swore again. And it doesn't matter who you're working with. It's got to be in a safe, secure environment. It's got to be accessible 24/7. It's got to be accessible on mobile devices. You've got to think about how that comes together. But you've also got to be more than just a point solution, because it's not just about, can I show a client their invoices, and can I show a client some knowledge or some information? No, it's about, how do I bring a client into a transaction that I'm running for them, and how can I show them the bottlenecks and where we are and what we're doing, and how can we present that information to them, and what does that mean? And doing it in a way that the internal lawyer or the practice support lawyer or the KM professional or partner or whomever is sort of comfortable in that they are in the right place at the right time, sharing the right level of information. And I think that's the biggest hindrance to unified collaboration isn't necessarily technology. As I said earlier, technology is a commodity. It's not, which creates massive opportunity for organizations like yourselves. But it's the human-centered approach to their experiences, their history. What does change management look like? What does adoption look like? And I'm sure from your conversations with your advisory board, you will be talking about features and functions, but you'll also be talking about experiences, and you'll be talking about how a lawyer will need to context switch from writing a memo about something and going into a transactional platform that the client's got access to complete a task and then to do something else. And I think that's when you break that, that's when unified collaboration really starts to sing. It's about sort of making sure that somebody can go from left to right very quickly without having to take a step back and go, right, I'm now in this mode and I need to do this and I need to consider these things, because it's naturally happening, because you're breaking down those traditional sort of combination of psychological and experiences and things that you sort of go, how it sort of sets out. I think one of the things I remember from the HiQ days is that there were a few clients, law firm clients, who had two instances of HiQ. One for internal collaboration and intranet-y kind of experiences, and one for client-facing stuff. And they had them branded slightly differently. Same logo, but branded slightly differently, URLs slightly different, because they wanted to really encourage that context switching to make sure somebody remembered that they were in a client environment or a client whatever. And I think that's a really that'll be a big part of your conversations with your advisory board. What do you do? Because it's overcoming that stigma, I guess. Stigma is the word I was looking for earlier.
Yeah, it is. There's a trade-off between, and this is the case in IT in general, between convenience and control, right? Yeah. If you want it to be super convenient, that means you are eliminating friction and roadblocks. But eliminating friction sometimes means you're going to assume an incremental risk, right? If for example, we are firm believers that Microsoft Teams is going to be an extremely effective delivery mechanism for external collaboration experiences. And it already is internally. But what Microsoft is doing with B2B sharing and shared channels, it is going to be the most frictionless way that a law firm can share whatever work product, invoices, legal project management task updates, financial metrics, legal team contact information, all that sort of stuff through Teams is going to be the most frictionless way. But to your point, we need to think about, okay, yes, it's extremely convenient. It's extremely cost effective because you're not licensing multiple systems. But we have to get it right in terms of making it crystal clear what is client facing and what's not. But there are ways to do that. That's a solvable. It's what we call figure outable, right?
Yeah,
we can figure that out.
Yeah, and I think part it's understanding what that user experience looks like and sort of understanding that and the behaviors of lawyers and people that work in law firms and professional services firms and bringing that together. It's interesting. I think we've talked before about the rise of Teams and what that looks like, not on a podcast, just over a beer. But I think what's interesting about that is, and I'd be interested again on your thoughts, which is the challenges that surround sort of that personalization of that experience. So when a law firm wants to provide a HiQ experience for their client, it's co-branded, it looks nice, it gives them a sense of, oh, look, they're really looking after me, and it's really important to the law firm to make sure that that experience is carried through. If you're just chatting in Teams and it looks purple like Teams does, and Teams does what Teams does, how do you sort of elevate that user experience beyond that sort of internal external paradigm that we were just talking about, but really sort of emphasize the fact that you're layering in another part of that experience with that customer? And how do you make the most of that? Because if you're just sharing invoice, if you're just doing the things that Teams does, it's just Teams. You know what I mean? So in my mind, I'm thinking that makes sense. Teams is a great conduit for collaboration and doing stuff, but it's the it's the capabilities that lie beyond that, which might not even exist yet. You know what I mean? And that's what's figure outable, if that makes sense. So you're starting to think about what are those experiences and tying that together, because it's sort of, you look at the high Qs of the world, and there are other extranet client facing technologies out there, including Autologyx. But you start to look at what are those experiences, what do they feel like, what value does the client put on it? Because again, the whole definition around extranet is it's client facing, it's external, but a lot of customers, and I think there's a podcast episode that you talked to, which is one of your clients was creating client facing assets and services, but charging money for them because they're a product and they're a service. So that's not just extranet, but it's bundled into the extranet definition that we've all used offhand for the last 15 years. And I think the evolution and sort of those niche kind of scenarios are they're opportunities. As you said, you moving from AcroWire to InfoDash, you've productized what you spent 10 years building into a platform that you can now scale and deliver against, and everything else. And your extranet service, I'm sure, will do the same thing, but it's picking your battles, because extranets means different things to different people.
Yeah, I actually hate the terminology intranets and extranets. I really, they don't make sense.
I think I've said it more in the last 45 minutes than I've said in the last 3 years, man. It's just, it's bonkers. But ultimately, it's just about getting work done in the right context at the right time. And I think lawyers, and we're all guilty of this because we're all software providers, but lawyers context shift, not just from sort of job to be done to job to be done, but they have to do it from product to product. There's so many. I mean, ILTA's great, and I love going to ILTA, partly because I get to spend time with you and people like you. But you sort of, there are hundreds and hundreds and an ever increasing number of hundreds of vendors out there. And I was chatting to a lawyer a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, it's fine. I use 15 different software products on average on a daily basis. And on a bad day, it's 25. That's bonkers. That's 25 systems. It's 25 things you've got to do. And some of them are getting really clever about how they are embedded inside of the Microsoft suite, and what Outlook is doing, and what Teams is doing, and everything else, and how the interfaces are sort of becoming sort of morphed. But ultimately, they're still having to think about, okay, I'm in this product now, I have to do this function. I'm in that product now, I have to do this. And it's like that bears a toll on somebody's productivity.
Yeah, in fact, it's been quantified, and I know we're running out of time here, but the HBR, Harvard Business Review, did a study, and I believe it was HBR, and the context switching tax is about 9% on average. That's huge. That's almost 4 hours a week.
Yeah.
What's that on a 2,000 hour year? That's 180 hours.
Don't ask me to do maths, man. Now you're embarrassing me.
But it's significant.
It's a chunk of time, and it's a chunk of money.
Yeah.
And I think sort of everyone, I think it's really interesting. Everyone's investing all of this sort of time and money in AI to drive efficiencies and productivity, and it can do this and it can do that. Whereas actually there is time and efficiency to be had without buying the next crazy thing that comes out the door. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Everyone can build stuff and buy stuff. It's all fine. But if you start to think about, okay, what are your processes? What are your workflows? And this is why we do what we do, and we do it well, is we spend time understanding, okay, well, how can we remove some of that tax? Because we're either facilitating the integration between the two systems and passing data and facilitating the allocation of tasks and doing it so that somebody doesn't have to go and create a task, or somebody doesn't have to go and create a new document from a document automation template they're going to pump in a load of. We hold the data. As long as you've got the data, then you can do stuff with it. And I think that's a really interesting approach in that sense, because that tax it's worth money, and sort of starting to think about what that looks like and how you can reduce that and what that means is a big part of moving forward, and not just sort of shiny stuff.
Indeed. I know. I feel like we're in a very much a chasing shiny objects phase right now with AI, and everybody has.
I think so. I think so.
It'll settle down eventually. Well, tell us quickly before we wrap up here, if people want to find out more about Autologyx. Most of our listeners do exactly that. They listen. Not everybody can see the logo and the spelling. How do people find out more about Autologyx?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find us on our website, autologyx.com. So AUTOLOGYX.com. You can, find us more. So we'll be at your next local conference probably, and we'll be around.
Awesome. You're going to be in Nashville, I would assume. Correct.
I am going to be in Nashville.
Good stuff for ILTACon.
I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good. So it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Sure you are. All right. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. I look forward to seeing you in Nashville, and let's stay in touch. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by InfoDash.